We are recording. Okay, so this is Adam from modelofcontrol.com, and we're talking with Thomas from Terminal, who is over in Philadelphia. Hello, how are you? there's a loaded phrase right now, eh?
Here's Adam. Like in the having looked at my CD art and everything, you probably expect an answer like in a state of permanent existential dread. Today the answer is well. I'm well. I'm at the beginning of an interesting process with this album having just come out, and it's quite a journey to see where it goes.
So, well, there seems like there's been quite a journey from where it's come from as well. So, tell me about like the band as it is, because it's clearly a multinational band with a fair bit of background story. So, tell me about this.
Well, the Terminal as a studio entity is just me.
Okay.
I am South African. I spent a lot of formative years in Canada, and have been back to the U.S. Off and on at different points in my life. First for college, later on for professional reasons. And this is where my live unit is. So Dave and Jess are here in Philadelphia, and this is kind of a good base for us at the time being.
Okay, and so you've been exposed to all kinds of culture across your life, then, kind of living all over the place. I mean, I think I've lived somewhere by moving a few cities in the UK, but you've been, what, 3 countries at least?
Yeah, and there was some significant degree of culture shock each, particularly as I was pretty young when I made those first 2 moves.
and
in South Africa as a kid, I didn't even really wear shoes. And then all of a sudden I'm in the Ottawa, Ontario region of Canada.
Well, you're definitely wearing shoes in winter, right?
For a start.
Yeah, I've been to Ottawa in the summer, but I've not been there in the winter. So I could, I'll go for the nice humid bit of May, but I couldn't imagine that it's much fun coming from somewhere like the warmer climes of South Africa to Ottawa in the winter.
Sure, but at the same time, very significant cultural, political, and other contrasts, as you would imagine.
Oh, of course, yeah, of course. And did that inspire you, kind of in terms of your worldview as well as the music that you've since made?
Oh yeah, very much so. Yeah, I mean, you as a kid in South Africa, you develop a certain idea of what government and society is like. In your formative years, you get one picture of it as you're a kid, and that's through the media and through things like the police, which are an entity that most people interface with their government primarily through. And then you go to a different place entirely, and I'm still relatively young the first time in one of these moves, and it got me started on this whole idea of what are societies, what are societies' ills, how bad can things get before we stop them. And in South Africa, there was one of those issues, of course. Nowadays, we have destruction of the climate, and we've had a series of a few years here of, to put it diplomatically, 4 years of frequently problematic politics here in the United States.
I hear you there.
So in each one of these cases, we find that society tends to want to stress itself to see how far are we going to go down a certain road before we decide that it's intolerable or we're doing something wrong. And kind of one of the core concepts of Terminal is an exploration of society's ills, and it is kind of a musical reaction to the idea that sometimes there are no breaks. Maybe there are no guardrails to society. Maybe a country will tip into institutionalized racism or fascism, or the climate will reach a point of no return. I'm just taking on little small stories in my, no grand themes in Terminal music or anything like that.
The record feels, I wouldn't say it feels negative, but it feels very dark and kind of almost a foreboding feel of, things are not well right now, and this is a kind of a classic trope in industrial music. At the end of the day, I've been listening to industrial music since I was before I was a teenager at the turn of the 90s and onwards, and there's always been that feel of bands that have always picked up on that. But maybe you seem like kind of one of the new breed of bands that are now picking up the baton on that, because there's no two ways about it. There is a feel to the 90s electro industrial that in your sound, but there's also a more modern sound in there as well. And I've been struggling to find where the lines cross, because it's done so seamlessly that it's difficult to tell. And sometimes and I take that as a good thing, because there are some times where you're just like, you listen to a new band and you're like, really? I've heard Frontline Assembly do this a million times. You at least have something new, bringing new to the table, and that kind of it's a short album, but it's kind of pretty snappy. We're not being lost in 8-minute tracks here. Was there a desire to kind of make this a kind of almost a 1-2 punch?
Yeah, you've actually caught right on to a bunch of the key things about this. There is this first going to the sort of dystopian, fatalistic view of the world, which you're right, is absolutely a trope in industrial music. My approach was to, the music certainly feels dark and ominous, because that's what I relate to. That's the subject matter. But I tried to say it, to do it with complex lyrics. There's not a lot of sort of repetition. There's the lyrics actually all mean something. I spent a lot of time crafting them, and to me, there's a song at the core of each one of them, rather than sort of a beat. The thing that intrigued me about 90s era industrial, and also in general, but particularly groups like Test Department, was that there was this real focus to use kind of the origins, the kind of musique concrète origins of the genre in your sound design. Lots of machines and mechanical noises, and it wasn't all microchips. It was gears turning and metal on metal crashes and things like that. And so I do use a lot of that, and that happens in it's a big part of 90s era music. But also, this is something to me that is really interesting about industrial techno. A lot of people who are techno purists were appalled to see industrial music creeping into it, and vice versa. People who are industrial enthusiasts don't want the techno borrowing from it. But the truth is, one of the things about industrial techno is they brought back a lot of these big clangorous machine noises and machine rhythms and ambient industrial bases, and that to me was as much as influence as it was when I experienced it first time around, in the late 90s as well.
I think I'm definitely, I get you on the industrial techno element. I have a little bit of fatigue of it at the moment, because there's just this never-ending cycle of yet another artist going, but I'm a techno artist, but I like industrial too. Right, yeah, of course. But there are some genuinely fascinating bands that are doing kind of that crossover between the two, because as you say, it is all about kind of picking up on those rhythms. Bands like Cabaret Voltaire in particular. Came from an environment that was of a city that was based around industry, and the clank, and I've lived in Sheffield, the clank of a kind of machinery is ever present when you're in kind of certain parts of town, because that's what you hear, that's what the city's built on. And there's no surprise that bands like that come from that kind of, go for that kind of sound. But I think, there's also a kind of a thing, I think it's careful not to just get caught in nostalgia, because certain other genres, to a point, the goth scene is kind of almost caught in its own loop nowadays and chasing its own tail, because everything has to sound like the Sisters or the Gatekeepers won't allow it.
Absolutely right.
And I think we have in our thing, as a wider industrial scene, there is at least some people still willing to be open-minded enough to go, actually, we can do something new, even though it's a sound that we've all heard before.
Well, I tried to, in some cases consciously, in some places not, incorporate different genres that are sort of adjacent to industrial music in this album. And people latch onto it for different reasons. People people hear a song like Dance Fall Prey and they go, oh, this is like somewhat goth sounding. I have a song there called Riot Shields, which is probably the most techno dance floor thing that I get. There's a song called Godfire, which is almost like new metal. So I wanted to kind of explore the boundaries of the sound without losing the sorts of musical textures that are interesting to me, that I said, kind of became the core of what the terminal sound is like.
So what were as a kind of adjacent to that, what were your kind of formative influences in this then? What were the things that really got you into this in the first place? Because there's always one band that kind of almost flicks the light bulb, right?
Yeah, there were a few. Of course, most people would probably credit Gary Newman for getting them interested in synthesizers to begin with. And that was a kid thing as well. The early industrial bands I liked were Test Department and Cabaret Voltaire, Skinny Puppy, of course. But my music also has a songwriting focus, and the other influence that comes, I think, from outside of the genre is I really love 70s glam rock. This may or may not be apparent in listening to the music, but if you listen to the album from that angle, you go, okay, there's a lot of internal rhymes packed into the choruses and these big long choruses. Songs are short, the album's short, and I use there is guitar in every song, but I use it sparingly. In some cases, it's I just kind of chopping away like Mark Bolan. In other case, there's just a little riff or two where I'll have floating across the top with a little bit of a Geordie Killing Joke kind of chime series of notes, But that is my left field reference, which I think keeps me on the track of making sure that the songs are all real songs, that they'll have focus to them. And I'm with you. There was this thing where we it's well known that I have ADHD, so this may be a factor. But there are times I'll be listening to a song, if the industrial track is 8 minutes long, at the 6 minute mark, I'm like, I kind of heard it. I'm going to skip ahead now. I kind of have said everything I need to say, and I move on to the next track.
Oh man, as a DJ, that's something that kind of you learn pretty quickly. Where's that cut point? Where's the point where I can go, we're done here, we can move on?
Right.
We've got,
Yeah, so I mean, that you're going to lose your audience if you don't keep things moving, and it's probably something that is worth experimenting with in in recordings as well. I mean, you have an audience there as well. That said, this is not the hill I'm going to die on. If I find that I have something to say that really is going to take me 6 minutes to say, that'll be a good challenge for me, but I'll try to make it happen.
Fair. I mean, the kind of the glam rock thing's interesting because the only other artist I can think of that has an overt nod to glam rock in industrial music is Jared Lush of Kemla. And particularly his Prude project, which was basically just glam rock that just happened to have loads of electronic touches all over it. But there's and it was great. But I think it's kind of a much maligned genre in many ways because its influence permeate the drum beats that came out of it, like the glitter beat is everywhere. Let's not we're much more than just Marilyn Manson stealing it, but everyone stole it at some point or another, and it's part of rock canon nowadays. And the kind of the flamboyancy and the kind of the idea that you can actually be someone else. You can tonight, Matthew, I'm going to be kind of this incredible character. Christ, that comes across in goth and industrial, right? Go back to Skinny Puppy.
Yeah, it very much does, right? Exactly.
And I think that kind of idea of image and the idea of presentation, I think, is really important in the music that we do, because it isn't just about the sound. It is about the visual aspect, particularly if you're going to be playing live. Because, the last thing we want is just, as I said to Lone Saw last night when I was interviewing them, the last thing I want to see is just yet another group of drums, bass, guitars, and a vocalist just standing there looking cool for an hour. Because I've seen it a million times. Do I need to pay £20 to go and see that again? Probably not. I'd much rather be seeing Test Department banging the shit out of huge amounts of metal on stage, or kind of people behind weird projections, and kind of something to make my brain work while I'm seeing it.
Going back to Gary Newman again, when he came along, he would try to remind people that what he was doing was show business, and of course he got slagged for it. And Depeche Mode came along years later and said the same thing, and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, that's brilliant," like the.
It's amazing how things come around, right? Because of course Gary Newman is now, held up as this kind of really important character, but it is easy to forget that he was laughed out of town for a few years in the 80s. It took him some years before he came back, and then people like Trent Reznor went, Gary Newman was really important to me, and everyone's like, really? Oh yeah, shit. So he was, and it was just, but and it's amazing how styles come in and out of fashion, and the kind of, and we don't need to worry about mainstream acceptance anymore. That's not important, because the musical world is so fragmented that, the likelihood of, yes, sure, I listen to other styles of music as well, and a whole host of different types of music, but do I care about them getting on top of the pops or, a kind of a chart show anymore? Not really, because I know full well they're not going to, And, like just recently, Mogwai, the post-rock band, after 25 years, made it to #1 in the album charts in the UK with their new album just recently, which felt like this tiny little victory for a band that I'd followed for 25 years. But the chances of that normally happening, absolutely none, and it's, and we have to be, the world has changed. We're not expecting that kind of success anymore. So, your kind of bands coming through are going to, play at festivals of a reasonable size and get a reasonable audience, and that's kind of what we expect. And we're not expecting world beating anymore, because we know it's not realistic. Does that affect how you see things in terms of, because obviously I'm presuming you have a day job and the band is kind of a secondary thing to this.
I do multimedia production as well. This is not the career that you would pick if you were trying to make yourself wealthy, right? The thing that's interesting to me is acknowledging that your audience may be very dispersed. When I look at all the analytics for who's buying the album and who's streaming the streams and downloading the MP3s, they were very big in Sweden, the United States, and Moscow. So you kind of like can't say to yourself, you can't go into this saying I'm targeting an audience. And that's, I think, one of the good things that's different, is you can say, I will make the kind of music I want to make. As a cliche as it is, I made the kind of album that I wanted to hear. And then the audience will find it. Your audience will find itself. Your audience doesn't want to pigeonhole itself into a particular label any more than maybe you do.
And there isn't much in the way of press anymore. There's a handful of us that are writing about the scene, but most of us are doing this as a secondary thing as well at the end of the day. And so, we're often relying on word of mouth. I might rely on someone sending me something going, hey, you should check this out. And I will do likewise, because, the internet is a wide place and it's difficult to find stuff. So if you suddenly get a personal recommendation going, hey, you need to listen to this because this album's great. Damn right, I'm going to go and listen to it. And this is, the world, how we consume music, and how we, not just how we buy it, but how we listen to it, and how, I try my best not to be just a passive listener that has it on in the background while I'm working, but it does happen. But I will sit down and listen to stuff, because sometimes it deserves a deeper listen. And other times you'll listen to something and like, nah, next. And you have to be ruthless.
I think there's nothing wrong with some music just sort of being a fuel for you as you are going through your day. I don't. I know that there are people who are going to appreciate some of these tracks just by the way they sound, or that they, like something like Godfire pumps them up, or Riot Shields gets them all pumped up. Of course, having been Canadian for a while, I did play hockey because that's the law. And there's I would put on before I was getting ready to go out and onto the ice, I hype myself up. I would put on like The Missing by Ministry, and then probably something like Wicked by Ice Cube or something like that. Try to work myself into a foaming rage, charge out of the locker room and go hit some people. And these are great tracks. These are songs by great artists who are making important music. I don't think they would, to knowing that in some cases it's just going to be fuel and inspiration. for whatever you're doing.
Fair. And how has it been across the last year? Because obviously the last year has been a complete shit show for everybody. But how has it been in terms of kind of preparing to release an album? How long had the album been done before it hit a release date?
Actually, I was pretty fortunate in that Metropolis had kind of a gap in February. I was going to be originally slotted for a May release, and somebody pushed their thing back, so I got slotted in February. It actually, the album was finished in like October, I think. We shot the video for a deadline around there, and from there things kind of went more or less according to schedule. It was the months preceding the completion of the album where we had to completely change course, because we were determined to have a really good live show. We didn't want to be one of these industrial bands who sort of with their notebook computer and like push the button and the guy runs around and sings. Yeah. So we had this big electronic drum kit. We had a good light show. The live show was going to be a focus of what we do, and we barely got to play anywhere before the whole thing was shut down. So that forced me to change my whole approach entirely. It was great because it made me learn about ways to promote your music online. But we are really excited to play live shows again, and we're going to be doing a live stream thing in May, I believe, and that will be a good warm up for us to get ready for whenever live music is actually really a thing again.
I think those live stream shows have been really good actually as well. I think some of them have suffered by particularly solo artists who've got a sketchy connection, and they're kind of charging you for a show that's like, can I actually see this? And it sounds pretty tinny. But then others have been so well professionally produced. There was a couple from Sweden I saw last year. Then Comes Silence. They're kind of
I love Then Comes Silence.
That album is phenomenal.
A while back.
Yeah,
those are my label mates over here.
Yeah, I reviewed them last year, and the live show was excellent. And the Swedish doom band Catatonia did one early on when they launched their album, and that was professionally done in a black studio, but the sound quality was phenomenal, and it was just like, wow, okay, so I'm never going to hear them this good when I'm hearing them live. And I've seen them live numerous times, and I'm like, yeah, they're fine live, but it's not normally as good as this.
That touches on a good point, which is that there are some advantages to live streaming over being a live show. You can, and that's kind of one thing we were thinking about. We don't want to just set up on stage and have the cameras like you're in the audience. A lot of people do, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we have this, when we're live streaming, we have an opportunity to have cameras all right up close on us, and to have motion, and obviously higher sound quality. Or alternately, to work in spaces that are interesting spaces where you couldn't fit an audience, or that are acoustically difficult. And we all work we play live with in-ear monitors, so we're almost silent on stage. So we don't really have to worry about excessive reverberation or anything like that. It'd be nice to find a really cool place to do a live show a live stream show at some point. But it'll be even cooler is actually going out and meeting some of our fans.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, no, there's no substitute for the fact that I've done one lot. London has been really weird in that there was this tiny period before Christmas for about a month or two where there were a handful of what they call distant shows, where venues that had got themselves kind of accredited to do so had basically dotting these chairs like in pairs, distance from everyone. And capacity was probably 20% of what it normally would be, and you got table service to get beer. So it was just like, and the merch thing was great because the one show I did do, there was like, log into this website and all the merch is here, and we'll deliver it to your on the app, and we'll deliver it to your seat. I'm like, wow. Now this is something
we might get used to that.
Yeah, exactly. And having beer, not having to go to the scrum of the bar while between the bands, and suddenly like, you can deliver me a can of beer. Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, take my money. And maybe the sound was a bit weird because, of course, less people in a venue means and more space means the sound's going to be different, right?
Yeah.
But it was kind of a for a band I really wanted to see, and one of the only bands I would have gone to see during this. But otherwise, I've not seen any bands since last March. And the last I saw Alcest and Kalen Mikla last March, and it was kind of almost the before times, and suddenly everything stopped the week after. And and having taken a break from live music, I think many of us agreed that there was this feeling that maybe we didn't need to take a break from it a little bit, because many of us were just going to shows because they were there. Was I enjoying all of those shows? Actually, probably not. And maybe I needed a break, and now I can get enthused about the bands that are coming back through. I've 242 rescheduled their London show for the 4th time this week, so it's now in next February when it was originally intended to be February 2020 or March 2020 or something like that. And other bands are doing the same, and we're just like, it's going to be a slow process picking up, because the venues have got to reopen, the promoters have got to get back into it, the bands have got to be ready to do it.
I mean, I think I'm sorry.
No, sorry, go.
I think it kind of works out in a sense, because just as people need to get used to the idea of getting out again, and venues need to get used to the new normal as well. The performers have gotten increasingly, I think, appreciative of what we had when we could play live. And so, we were saying the other day to each other, like, I'm so ready to play in a crappy bar in front of 12 people right now. Like I'm so ready to do that. So I think maybe if the crowds don't initially like immediately reappear at full capacity, that's fine. We'll be grateful to see who we see.
I'll put my cards on the table here. I've never been a performer. I've DJ'd, I've been a DJ for many years and a writer. So I'm kind of almost the other side of it. But there is that kind of that feeling when you're DJing in a venue and suddenly a whole load of people get up and dance to your stuff. And it's like, this is really cool. But I've never been on the side of a band being on stage, and I'm probably glad I never was. But there, that kind of, even that tiny little buzz, having not had it for a year, I mean, Christ, hopefully everyone will be almost re-energized. And if they're not, then they probably need to be asking the question of, are they doing the right thing anymore?
Yeah, but what you said is a good point. It's like now we can question whether we were just going to these things out of habit, And as performers, you say, like, how are we taking anything of our audience for granted? And so if the fans are going to come out to see us now, it's not just from momentum, it's because they really want to. And so it's on us to make sure that the show is worth their while.
Yeah, and people, are people going to be more discerning with the money that they spend nowadays? Are they going to be going, should I think about whether I go to this or not? It'll be an interesting experiment to see how this goes, but there's been a real clamor because we're edging out of lockdown here at the moment, and more and more people are being vaccinated, and they're starting to kind of talk about a roadmap to opening stuff. But apparently there was a news story in one of the papers this morning that some bars are booked up months in advance now from when bars are supposedly opening again on April 12th, but only outdoor for a couple of months. Some of these bars are already fully booked until June, when they might be able to fully reopen. I mean, it tells you a little bit about just how crazy the clamor for this is, because people just want to go for a drink with their mates.
They're backed up and ready. Yeah. One of the challenges for us is, the timetable for it being so much in flux and indeterminate. We have most of our fan bases in Europe, and so far anyway, and that's not a kind of easy thing to book at this time. If we're going to be over there for a couple of weeks and do shows in 6 or 7 different countries, that's not the kind of thing that's easy to reschedule if 1 or 2 of them have some resurgence of
which some of them are at the moment. In Central Europe, it's terrible right now, and I think we're likely to see different countries come out at different stages. And of course, for us waiting for you guys,
got our own variant, so
yes, don't worry, so did we.
That's right.
Yeah, and it is going to make issues for us. Kind of like there's debate at the moment. Is Infest going to have the main festival that we have over here at the end of August? Is that going to happen? Is it not? We did a virtual version last year, and everyone's kind of on tenterhooks. We've all booked hotels that are cancelable just in case, because we're all like, well, it should be okay, but which bands are going to be able to commit, because we don't know at the moment, and so everything is so unknown, and it's kind of, I'm trying not to get too excited about it. I think we're in the position that it'll be great when it happens, but right now we've all got this thing where we've settled nicely with live streams at the moment, and they'll have to do. And I don't think live streams are going to go away. I think there will be midweek stuff maybe, or things where there's a number of people that can't come out to clubs anymore, that aren't in a position to do that. and I've been saying, Christ, can you keep these going? Because this is an element of social contact that I'm not getting, a way to hear music that we're not otherwise hearing. And it's like, okay, does that mean that maybe we can DJ in a venue and live stream that out if the internet's good enough? Can we do that? You know, and these kind of questions are now being asked. So maybe we've got new ways of doing this, right?
Well, you know, before we started here, we were talking a little bit about how we all reevaluating our own preferred degree of social engagement. You know, there are a lot of introverts in society, and you had a chance to instead of being in a noisy crowd of people, you know, packed in all around you, to be sitting there in comfort in your own space, to be able to chat with all your friends and provide feedback, and you know, like on Twitch, you know, when everyone's adding their commentary to the things that goes along. For some people, that's probably still going to be the preferred way to experience this stuff, and so it's good that we all got our act together to figure out how to do it.
And you know what? I think it's also been liberating in being able to play music as well, because you're not beholden to the dance floor anymore. You're not having to just play, God, I've got to play that Covenant hit again, and I've got to play that VMV hit again. And, you know, I don't have to worry about that anymore. I can do a Friday night industrial night with a cohort where we're both DJing. I can play literally what I like because I don't care. And people will be like, oh, wow, I've not heard this before. What is it? Well, here's a Bandcamp link straight away. There's what it is. And you know, we're able to get people directly to the music, but also we're able to promote newer music in a better way, because if I'm doing a club set, the likelihood is I'm probably only going to be able to get away with 2 or 3 new songs that maybe not everyone will hear or pay attention to. And they'll only pay attention when they hear, you know, Dark Angel or whatever, you know, or whatever big club hit they're hearing this week. So this gives me so much more flexibility and so much more leeway to be able to do that, to be able to play bands like yours. And is that going to go away? I mean, that's a phenomenal way of doing things now, because it kind of gives you the interactivity that a podcast maybe doesn't.
I feel like people have taken this time, I mean, not necessarily just because of the live versus live streaming thing, but just the time in relative isolation, that people have been great consumers of entertainment during this last year, greater consumers of entertainment. And that, to me, leads to you become more explorative with your entertainment choices. You know, you can go out and find new types of music. You can click along YouTube in directions that you might not have gone otherwise. You got a lot of time by yourself. You're not out at the pub. You know, I mean, like, I did more reading. I've discovered the types of TV shows I would not have normally watched. You know, the kind of things that you do during lockdown when you're like, okay, you know, what else have we got? We've gone through all the usual.
I finally watched The Wire after years and years of meaning to. So, you know, I'll clock that as one achievement.
Congratulations.
It was great too, but you know, I wish I'd watched it 15 years ago. But it's, you know, you're right. It's you know, there are, you know, we have had to rethink, but we've also been able to grow in new ways. And you know, some of us are now bored as hell of all of this, and we're now done. But you know, we've not run out of music yet. There's still new music coming through. There's still been a remarkable amount of music coming through. But if I hear one more promo person telling me that this is their interpretation of lockdown, I might scream, because you know, we don't care. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, you know, we've all lived this. We don't need it.
we all have our own mental picture that we have painted ourselves. Let's not take someone else's on as well.
Precisely. Talking of pictures, actually, is that a kind of an original concept for the artwork behind you on your wall?
It is. This is the terminal wall, made by Claudia Strepp, a German artist. Her take on a Berlin Wall for Terminal. So it's a battered, distressing, concrete-looking business going on. So a spray-painted logo.
It looks really cool. So a kind of I guess as a final thing, what are your views of the future, bearing in mind that obviously you're writing fairly dystopian kind of pessimistic music? What are your own views of what we see? Do you think there is a kind of almost not a reset, but a way of moving forward that might actually be more inclusive going forward, or do you think we're stuck with something a little more negative for now?
You mean like in the genre or in society as
a bit of a wider society, I think, more than anything.
wider society? Yeah. I'm not really pessimistic. I am actually optimistic. You probably wouldn't know it by listening to a lot of music, but you know, a lot of my some of the songs are. I try to paint the picture of realistically a picture of the problems that we're facing, but a lot of the songs are sort of calls to action or battle cries to retaliate as well. You know, a song like "Crackdown," for instance, is inspired by the sorts of dark, sinister, anonymous, policing and extrajudicial killings and things that we've seen across society in the last few years. But it also paints a picture in which we've all we reach a point where we've all had enough and we were ready to retaliate. Godfire is the same thing. It's like you've come here, you've taken our land, you've destroyed our culture, but eventually our arrows will fill the skies. We'll be there is the worm will turn again, as it always does.
And you only need to look at what's I don't know whether you've seen in the news this week in the UK, but there's been a pretty horrendous issue with a kind of an acting police officer who's been arrested for murder of a young woman who he apparently took off the street and killed, and the police cracked down on a vigil last night. Then there's been all kinds of craziness about it in the news, and it's horrendous, and it's unnecessary, and sadly all too common with the government we have at the moment. But it is kind of reminding that kind of oppression of women is still going on, much as oppression of minorities is still going on, and and there seems to be no desire to amend the status quo, even though there's a large proportion of people clamoring, going, we've had enough, we need to change. And we're almost pushing against a leaden object to kind of make that change. But we've proven in the past that things have happened, right?
Yeah, they have. It was a sobering thing for me, as we all celebrated South Africans the end of apartheid, so the official end to South African apartheid. But to a lesser degree, it's an institutional thing. It does still exist in there. There still are townships. There is still a gigantic gap between the wealthy and the poor, and it's not. It is the reason. The extent to which the gap is closed economically is not because there's more equity between whites and blacks. It's because there's a small class of highly educated blacks who have managed to, who are now making some money, whereas as opposed to none of for society being completely oppressive against them. So it skews the mental. Excuse the public image of what is really still a bad situation. And of course, apartheid still exists in different parts of the world. It's, I guess, for me, as someone who rails against these things, it's a bit of job security. There will always be stuff like this for me to rail against. But just the same, I'd like to have some new topics to. I wish some of these things weren't quite so timeless. These things.
Yeah. And I'm in my early 40s, and I lived through Thatcher in the UK and the kind of the bullshit that happened there, and I moved to somewhere that had been hit very hard by what she'd done previously, and it's kind of, these things run deep, and as you say, it's institutionalized, and that certain things and certain ways of thinking become the paradigm, and it's very difficult to change that. And we kind of, as individual voices, I'm not sure there's too much we can do, but we have to unite with others to try and make a better change. But that isn't a change that happens overnight. In some cases, sometimes change literally happens overnight, as it did with the Berlin Wall. Where kind of suddenly, all this years of pressure suddenly just gave like a dam bursting, right? And suddenly, kind of basically dominoes fell. But we see those kind of things once in our lifetime, or maybe twice in our lifetime, because those kind of seismic events are so difficult to make happen. We would dearly love to get rid of the government that we have here at the moment, but we don't have a chance in an election for a few years, and strangely enough, Britain's not too polite to kind of try and make a violent resurrection.
Guy Fawkes notwithstanding.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, yeah.
Yeah, right. So the thing is, like, do you want you want your tipping point when the pressures, when public pressures, reach their reach the peak at which some transformational change happens overnight.
Mhm.
You want that to be a Berlin Wall coming down instead of a Tiananmen Square. Right.
Yeah.
So these things build for a long time, and you hope that there's a fear that your moment will not go the way you want it to, and things will be worse.
Or you'll miss the point that you need, and it never happens, which is other things that have happened in history, right? So, we have to be careful what we wish for, I guess.
Always.
Yeah. But yeah, on that positive note, thank you so much. What I'm going to do is I'll stop recording, and then